Good morning. My name is Ed Scott, and on behalf of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our online worship service. This is a welcoming congregation, open to all, no matter whether you arrived this morning bearing joys or sorrows, you are welcome. Whoever you are, however you identify, no matter who you love, and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you're welcome here. If your spiritual truths are different than mine, that's okay, because we value the individual search for truth and for meaning. Our program staff and worship associates are always interested in trying out new ideas for worship. And a particular challenge of online and hybrid worship is finding ways to help our congregation stay connected. To that end, we're encouraging members to share short videos or photos of places that they find meaningful for reflection. You will see an example of this in this morning's Time for All Ages. And at the end of this service and in next week's e-news, watch for more detail on how you can get involved. I also encourage you to visit our website at firstuuwilm.org and consider signing up for our weekly e-news. And now, let us be present with our whole selves as we prepare for this morning's worship.
Kathy, thank you so much for that warm music. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, and I want to add my welcome to Ed's warm welcome. to you this morning. Yes, I might use the word warm a lot this morning because we are very cold in this sanctuary this morning, and we miss both the literal warmth of your presence as well as the metaphorical warmth of your presence. But so glad that through the work of the AV team, we are able to stay connected with each other. We've got some wonderful music planned today and a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect on Martin Luther King Jr. For the call to worship, I've chosen these words from his letter from a Birmingham jail. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men and women willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and to transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood and sisterhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join us by lighting it. The following words are adapted from a talk given January 16th, 2017 at a Transylvania University Unity breakfast, and the author is unknown to me. As well as anyone, Dr. King knew this was an imperfect world, but when he spoke of living in a beloved community, bound together by love and justice, he knew we were made for better. He resisted the taunts of enemies and the chiding of his friends because his hope allowed him to see the human nature beneath the racism and the violence and the indifference of his oppressors. Friends, this chalice flame represents hope. It represents strength. It represents the unity in our humanity as we seek a more just world.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race, for I don't want to run this race in vain.
please join me in affirming our mission? Together, First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Thank you to the Claney family for sharing a video of a place they find reflective. Today, I am sharing the story Martin's Big Words by Doreen Rappaport. Everywhere in Martin's hometown, he saw the signs, white only. His mother said these signs were in all southern cities and towns in the United States. Every time Martin read the words, he felt bad until he remembered what his mother told him. You are as good as anyone. In church, Martin sang hymns. He read from the Bible. He listened to his father preach. These words made him feel good. When I grow up, I'm going to get big words too. Martin grew up. He became a minister like his father, and he used the big words he had heard as a child from his parents and from the Bible. Everyone can be great. He studied the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. He learned how the Indian nation won freedom without ever firing a gun. Martin said love when others said hate. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He said together when others said separate. He said peace when others said war. Sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together. In 1955, on a cold December day in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks was coming home from work. A white man told her to get up from her seat on the bus so he could sit. She said no and was arrested. This made Montgomery's black citizens angry. They decided not to ride the buses until they could sit anywhere they wanted. For 381 days, they walked to work and school and church. They walked in rain and cold and in blistering heat. Martin walked, talked, sang, and prayed with them until the white city leaders had to agree they could sit anywhere they wanted. When the history books are written, someone will say there lived black people who had the courage, ordered them to stop, but they kept on marching. Wait. For years, I have heard the word wait. We have waited more than 340 years for our rights. They were jailed, beaten, and murdered, but they kept on marching. Some black Americans wanted to fight back with their fists. Martin convinced them not to by reminding them of the power of love. Love is the key to the problems of our world. Many white Southerners hated and feared Martin's words. A few threatened to kill him and his family. His house was bombed, but he refused to stop. Remember, if I am stopped, this movement will not be stopped because God is with this movement. The marches continued. More and more Americans listened to Martin's words. He shared his dreams and filled them with hope I have a dream that one day in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. cared about all Americans. He cared about people all over the world, and people all over the world admired him. In 1964, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He won it because he taught others to fight with words, not hate. Martin went wherever people needed help. In April 1968, he went to Memphis, Tennessee. He went to help garbage collectors who were on strike. He walked, talked, sang, and prayed with them. On his second day there, he was shot. He died. His big words are still alive for us today. I wonder how Martin Luther King Jr.'s big words inspire you to live with intention.
This morning, we want to acknowledge the return to our sanctuary of this decision sculpture, which was created by the sculptor Charles Parks. Over 70 years, Charles Parks made hundreds of sculptures and statues in his studio on the Brandywine. Many of them stand prominently on display at such places as the Brandywine River, the Museum of Art, Brandywine Park, and along I-95, where one of his famous Madonnas greets travelers entering into Delaware from the Memorial Bridge. In the course of his life and work, Parks became one of the state's most treasured artists and earned a reputation across the nation. I recently enjoyed a new book by the author Pam George and photographer Kevin Fleming, which shows and explains the remarkable art of this man, who some have called the sculptor of Delaware. So as we look at this particular sculpture in our sanctuary, entitled Decision, let's remember that in order to live with intention, oftentimes we arrive at moments to decide. How do we align our actions with our strongest and deepest intention? Oftentimes, that is a moment of decision. When we get diverted or distracted from our most heartfelt intentions, how do we move back towards that alignment with what matters to us most? What we choose is what we are, as one of our hymns says. And so may this sculpture remind us that we oftentimes, as we gather in this place together, encounter moments of decision. May we support and hold one another continuously in those precious, poignant moments in our lives. So, Howard Thurman was a spiritual guide for many in the civil rights movement, including Martin Luther King Jr., and Thurman seemed to express in his prayers a longing for congruency and a striving for wholeness. I've adopted this prayer from one of Thurman's meditations. Following this meditation, we will have a period of shared silence, and during that time, you may want to think of those places in your life where you are seeking healing or those concerns and joys that you might have for loved ones or others or our world. Following that silence, there will be an opportunity to enter your joy or concern in the chat online. So now let us join together in the spirit of prayer with these words adapted from Howard Thurman. Lord, I want to be more holy in my mind. My thoughts tend ever to be divisive and scattered. In so many ways, my mind is a house divided, and the conflicts rage up and down my corridors. I need wholeness. Oh, that my mind may be stilled by thy holy hush, Lord. I want to be holy in my mind. Lord, I want to be more holy in my words. Words are my common tools of communication. All that many know of me are the words used as connecting links between my inward parts and theirs. The temptation is ever to use words as instruments of confusion and disorder. Words can sting, enrage, and humiliate. Words, oh, that thy holy quiet may invade my words, that they may heal, bless, and make whole bruised, broken, and fearful ones. Lord, I want to be more holy in my heart. Here is the citadel of all my desiring, where my hopes are born and all the deep resolutions of my spirit take wings. In this center, my fears are nourished and all my hates are nurtured. Here my loves are cherished and all the deep hungers of my spirit are honored without quivering and without shock. In my heart, above all else, let thy love and integrity envelop me until my love is perfected and the last vestige of my desiring is no longer in conflict with thy spirit. Lord, I want to be more holy in my heart. So now let us enter a time of shared silence as we reflect on this meditation by Howard Thurman, and as we recall where our heart leads us this morning and care in terms of our care for ourselves, those we love, or our world. And following this shared silence, we'll have an opportunity to write in the chat those concerns and joys. Please take a moment now to enter your joys and concerns in the chat if you haven't done so already. May all whose names who are listed in the chat find peace and healing this day. Maybe you want to speak those names aloud at home so you hear the resonance of your own care for them even now. Our reading is another short selection from the letter from a Birmingham jail by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He writes, "Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." I remember the first time that I stood in front of this metal sculpture depicting 50 doves rising upward, representing 50 states. It is entitled "Free at Last," and the sculpture, created by Chilean artist Sergio Castillo, is inspired by the memorable words of Martin Luther King Jr., "Free at last," in his "I Have a Dream" speech. The sculpture stands right in front of Marsh Chapel at Boston University. To the right of the sculpture is the School of Social Work, and to the left is the School of Theology, where I did my theological studies and where Martin Luther King Jr. studied for his PhD in theology. While facing the sculpture, behind me was the busy Commonwealth Avenue with its river of vehicles and the above-ground cars of the Green Line subway. Indeed, the peacefulness of the plaza was not an oasis from the ever-present noises of the city. This particular spot now seems to me to be a vortex of the forces and commitments that shaped Martin Luther King's life and work, confronting and mobilizing the church, finding spiritual grounding through engagement with theological study, having deep care for our society, and particularly those who were dispossessed, and the ever-present cries from the streets and the hearts of the world and the people of his time. Each of these, I believe, were compass points in what I am calling Martin Luther King Jr.'s holistic spirituality. There's Marsh Chapel that we saw in the slide, and indeed, he was a man that grew out of the black church, in his case, the black church where his father pastored, and who engaged with that church throughout his life. It so happens that Howard Thurman, who was a spiritual guide to many in the civil rights movement, was chaplain at Marsh Chapel from 1953 to 1965. Martin Luther King Jr. is said to have carried his worn copy of Thurman's book, Jesus and the Dispossessed, with him when he traveled. King oftentimes quoted from that book. And then there is that theological school. King was a man who was drawn to Boston University School of Theology in particular because of a perspective on theology at the time that was called personalism. As King wrote in one of his papers to explain personalism, God is not a process projected somewhere in the lofty blue. God is not a divine hermit hiding himself in a cosmic cave. God is forever present with us. This same view impacted his understanding of the fundamental worth of every human being. As he wrote, "The worth of an individual does not lie in the measure of his intellect, his racial origin, or his social position. Human worth lies in relatedness to God. An individual has value because he has value to God." So these are some of the underlying perspectives that propelled King into taking risk and challenging the racial injustices of his time and the system of white supremacy, which was so and is still so prevalent. Indeed, King felt somehow or another that God was with them in the struggle, and that restoring a respect for human dignity required him to do something about racism. The caste system in our country and the pervasiveness of a system that trapped everyone in a dynamic of oppression, whatever their color or position in society. Even while finishing his dissertation, which interestingly enough was entitled, or it's interesting to me, was entitled A Comparison of the Conceptions of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich, who's a Christian existentialist, and Henry Nelson Wyman, a Unitarian and a process theologian, King did not do so in an ivy tower. He traveled back and forth from Boston University to Montgomery, where he was serving as pastor at the Dexter Street Baptist Church, and where he got thrust into this reemergence of the civil rights movement with the launch of the Montgomery boycott, which you heard in Catherine's story. So while studying, he was engaged in action. While studying and writing about Tillich, I like to think that Tillich's call for human beings to be shaped by an ultimate concern, he was also at the same time fashioning his own life and ministry around an ultimate concern, a commitment to confronting the systems of racial injustice. While pondering Henry Nelson Wyman's view of God as creative interchange, he was engaged in actively applying some of what he was learning about the power of nonviolence in resisting evil, as he engaged at the same time in the creative interaction with oppressors. His, I argue, was a holistic spirituality. I believe it is as relevant for us today as it was when he forged his ideas in his book and in the movement for civil rights and in his own life. These days, we might tend to actually confuse the word spirituality. It's easy to do, since some of us may think it only means like the power of crystals and aura cleansing, or to some it can mean trance-like states or esoteric religious rituals and practices. But some of us indeed understand the dangers of a spirituality that can lead us only to self-absorption. This was not Martin Luther King's spirituality. Yes, there is available to each of us an engaged spirituality that understands that there can be a power that inspires and underlies our deeper engagement with the world and grounds us and propels us beyond what is comfortable or merely self-serving. King, from early on, saw the connection between attention to the individual soul and the concern for social justice, not as a dichotomy, but as intricately connected with one another. For King, concern for society and the welfare of those most dispossessed of rights and dignity was central to his holistic spirituality. When he attended Crozer Theological Seminary, which was then located in Chester, Pennsylvania, not far from here, he articulated his call to ministry in this way. I must attempt, he wrote, to change the soul of individuals so that their societies may be changed. On the other hand, I must attempt to change their society so that the individual soul will have the possibility of a change. Therefore, I must be concerned about unemployment, slums, economic insecurity. I am a profound advocate of the social gospel. Indeed, a social gospel that for him was forged in the experience of the black church, a black social gospel that spoke to the lives and to the aspirations and to the pains and the suffering of a generation of African Americans. To try to understand Martin Luther King Jr. without also trying to understand the forces that directed him, what I'm calling the compass points of his holistic spirituality, is to ignore what compelled him to move on and through. past the bombings of his home where his young family abided, past being jailed and vilified by some, past moments of defeat, past the constant surveillance from the FBI later in his life, and past his own personal moral failures. For any of us who dare to take a stand for social justice and for confronting the intersecting systems of oppression, and particularly what Isabel Wilkerson aptly calls the caste system in our country, we had better have some kind of spiritual grounding as well that can move us beyond the fact that there will never be immediate results in this work, and that there will be many heartbreaking moments along the way. We must be grounded in a similar kind of holistic spirituality if we are to keep on moving on. This may be what Nelson Mandela meant by the long road to freedom. And it must be our realization as we embark on any path towards confronting the forces of the new Jim Crow that are still very much present in our time and that consistently reassert themselves and require a vigilance and a fortitude strong enough to uphold the human heart through frustration and fatigue at its relentlessness. Mandela provides this reality test, a good one for us to hear and to check in with ourselves as we think of ever wanting to embark on the path of social justice or the work to end racial injustice. Mandela wrote, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." There are many more hills to climb. Are we up to that kind of work, that kind of challenge that requires diligence and fortitude and spiritual grounding and strength? Such a long and relentless journey requires spiritual power and fortitude, oftentimes beyond what our own will might provide. This is the kind of spirituality that Martin Luther King drew upon. This is the kind of spirit that can come to us from the Spirit or in our own hearts and minds, may come to us from the collective power of others gathered in that same Spirit. Martin Luther King Jr., guided by his spiritual teacher, Howard Thurman, found some spiritual guidance in Gandhi's nonviolent resistance to evil. More than just a method, more than just a political strategy, it was for King a way of life that required as much inner work for him, even as it provided what Gandhi called a soul force to confront social evil. Nonviolent resistance was for King a lived intention that he constantly had to keep aligning his self around and towards, in spite of all the arguments around him to give it up. A new book by the historian Paul Harvey entitled Martin Luther King, A Religious Life, explores these many influences upon King's religious life, and he points out in the book that on his birthday each year... Okay, so as I was saying, in the book by Paul Harvey entitled Martin Luther King, A Religious Life, Harvey points out that on his birthday each year, Americans are treated to a few of his greatest hits: The Dream, The Content of Our Character, Nonviolence, and others, shorn of context and missing many of the most fundamental themes of King's message. The brief 2-minute life of King presented each year in January is not completely false. He did have a dream. He did believe in a universal brotherhood of all humanity. But if we strip from the context of his ever-loving life, his strong social views, social radicalism of his views, King's message remains blurred and incomplete. And so he almost lost his life in his work that he had dedicated himself to. He experienced a public attack by a troubled woman who stabbed him with a letter opener in a public place. While he was in the hospital, Howard Thurman visited him and encouraged King to take some time off, to relax, to regroup. Yet even though King tried to do so, tried to set aside at least one day a week for meditation and prayer, he often found that his duties took over and he wasn't able to set aside that time. Even so, King was actually sustained by religious experience as well. As he wrote in one of his papers, "I do remember moments that I have been awe-awakened. There have been times that I've been carried out of myself by something greater. And to that something I gave myself. Has this great something been God? Maybe after all I have been religious for a number of years, and I'm now only becoming aware of it." But in any case, his awe-awakened moments did not take him outside of life, but made him more engaged with life. He was critical of a piousness that did not include some expression of human care for one another. He wrote, "Christ is more concerned about our attitudes towards racial prejudice and war than he is about our long processionals." King often reminded his audience that it was not enough to pray without acting, and it would not suffice to call for love when the demand should be justice. He reminded his readers in letters in a Birmingham jail that Christianity had taken a turn. In the early church, he wrote, "The church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society." He was trying to provoke the church into being reawakened again to its role as a disruptor and not just one that blessed the status quo. In their essay about Martin Luther King's spiritual life, the authors point out that King had some spiritual grounding. And they described it in this way. In contrast to the naturalist and the humanist, who in his King's opinion either diminished the human being to merely an animal or idealized the human to some godlike stature, King believed in a middle ground between them. He saw the human being as nothing less than a being of spirit, as a spiritual being. So the work before us, dear congregation, is to embody hope when despair and overwhelm would be the most rational response. To be engaged when the inclination may be to retreat because of our overwhelm. But yet this congregation has a history of being engaged, of staying engaged, of finding ways to stay connected with ourselves, but also with the concerns of our neighborhood and our world. As our Human Rights Task Force begins to launch a series of discussions on the book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Cost Everyone, and How We Can Prosper Together, I want to encourage you to participate so that each of us may deepen our understanding and broaden our perception of the dynamics of racism. With some informed perspectives, we can begin to fashion some real responses. In the meantime, the opportunity to live out an engaged spirituality is right at our doorstep. This week, I attended a virtual town hall sponsored by the Delaware Poor People's Campaign, which focused on the continual struggles of those in our city, particularly in the 11th Street Bridge community, who are survivors of Hurricane Ida. And you heard those as well, Ed, the stories of people who, even though maybe they've received some hotel vouchers to get them through, we're not certain if those vouchers could be extended. Some reported sleeping in their cars or couch surfing among friends, relatives, or even people they did not know. In addition to their own trauma, they reported on the trauma of their children after surviving the flood, losing their affordable housing homes, and awaiting more ready and coordinated responses to their ongoing plight. Yes, they have received some help, but they are telling us they need more, that there's a gap between what has been offered and promised and what they're actually receiving. Perhaps you could take some action this week and call the mayor, call the governor's office, and ask for there to be a review of what is happening to those who have survived Hurricane Ida and how the federal funds that are available can be used more strategically and more readily to respond to their plight. King clearly understood that voting and empowerment were connected, and so again this week we are faced with another opportunity to respond. The family of Martin Luther King Jr. will lead a march in Washington, D.C. tomorrow, calling on lawmakers to pass new federal standards for elections, even after those efforts took a big setback on Thursday. Maybe you could call your senators this week, every single day, and demand that they immediately restore the Senate in order to pass the Freedom to Vote, John R. Lewis Act. That is taking an action in the path that Martin Luther King Jr. opened up before us. That's the opportunity we have to respond. In closing, I want to share these words from a prayer by Martin Luther King. May we find a way in which humanity will be able to stand up in the midst of oppression, in the midst of darkness and agony, where we as humans will be able to stand there and love our enemies, bless those persons that curse us, and pray for those individuals that despitefully use us. And this is the way that will bring us once more into the society which we think of as the beloved community. That will be the day when white people, colored people, whether they are brown, whether they are yellow, whether they are black, will join together and stretch out with their arms and be able to cry out, "Free at last, free at last. Great God Almighty, we are free at last." So may it be.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
When I was a college student, Dr. King was a speaker at our small Midwestern college. And in that packed gymnasium, he spoke with a passion and a thirst for equity, justice, and peace. He increased our thirst, our longing for the same. And looking back, it was obvious that he knew that the key to that old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The key is to make the horse thirsty. And I believe that he increased our thirst. And I believe that we are all here because we have a thirst or a passion as part of our journey. But as you know, this place and this community and the opportunities which it creates to meet that thirst, the spiritual waters that we drink, need financial support to continue to sustain the mission of our work. And so this morning, I encourage you to give as you are able. And the options for giving are listed on the screen. And there are 3 ways. You can mail a check to the church office here on Halstead Road. You could use a smart device to use the Venmo app to give, or you could go to the church website and donate in that manner. And now, please join me in dedicating our offering as we say together, to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Oh, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Upon the mountain, my Lord spoke. Out of his mouth came fire and smoke. Jordan River, chilly and cold, chill the body, but not my soul. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Oh, every time Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. All around me looks so shine. I ask my Lord if all was mine. Ain't but one train runs this track. It runs to heaven and runs right back. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Oh, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart,
So these closing words. When faced with the harsh, unwelcome realities of this life and world, we are tempted to retreat and to withdraw. But may we know in the center of ourselves that there is something more that wants to emerge, that wants to break forth within us and through us. Dare we pause long enough to get acquainted with that something more? If so, we might hear a chorus of warriors empowered by a soul force, singing these words within us and asking us to join in the chorus. So repeat these words after me. We've got to keep on moving forward. We've got to keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back.
The following is also adapted from the Unity talk given in 2017, which I cited earlier. Let us remember the King's hope for a beloved community depends on our willingness to act for those who need it most. That is what Dr. King knew and understood. That is why he always returned to the consoling reality that while the world, the nation, the city waited to live in the beloved community envisioned by the prophets, we here now, we, the precious few, we can choose now to work and make that blessed community right here, right in this room, in this place, in Wilmington. So as we extinguish the chalice, may we carry forward the flames of intention and conscience.